All right, so today we're diving into some pretty deep waters.
Yeah.
The epistemology of religion.
That's right.
And we've got,
A great source.
yeah, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy's entry.
Absolutely. And what we're going to try to do is break down how philosophers look at
Yeah.
religious belief, like the very idea of religious belief.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's not like we're going to
Yeah.
go on a quest for God here,
Right.
but we're going to examine
Quest itself. Yeah.
that quest itself. Yeah.
Are these beliefs, like, are they justified?
Yeah.
Can we, are they built on solid ground or
Yeah.
something else like faith?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question
Right.
that a lot of people grapple with.
Absolutely.
Not just people of faith, but I think philosophers, too.
Yeah.
You know, they're trying to figure out, like,
Right.
how do we know?
Yeah.
How do we know, if we even can know,
Totally.
that our beliefs about religion are true or not?
That's a great question.
And that's where epistemology comes in, I guess.
Right.
It's like the study of knowledge itself.
Exactly. Yeah. How do we get it? How
Right.
do we know that we have it?
How can we be sure we're not fooling ourselves?
Absolutely.
All very important questions.
Yeah.
So the Stanford Encyclopedia starts off
Okay.
with this idea called evidentialism,
Yeah.
which sounds pretty straightforward.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, at first glance, it makes sense.
Like, you should only believe something if you have evidence.
Right.
I mean, it's
Right.
like if I told you I could fly,
Yeah.
you would probably want
More than your word for it.
a little bit more than just my word for it, right?
Some evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Some sort of proof.
So I guess think of it like this.
Okay.
Like, imagine a detective
Yeah.
at a crime scene.
Right.
They do just
Go with a hunch.
go with their gut feeling.
No.
They look for fingerprints. They look for DNA. They look for
Witness statements.
witness statements, hard evidence.
Yeah.
And evidentialism kind of says
Yeah.
we should apply that same,
Rigor.
that rigor to all beliefs,
All beliefs.
including religious ones.
Right. Including religious beliefs.
So, I mean, if you're applying that to religion,
Yeah.
if evidentialism is,
The standard.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of religious beliefs
Might be.
end up on shaky ground
Yeah. Might be in trouble.
because a lot of people base their faith
Right.
on personal experiences or interpretations of sacred texts.
Right.
And a hardcore evidentialist might say, well, that's not proof.
Yeah, that's not good mess.
Yeah.
You need more than that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we have one philosopher, William Clifford,
Okay.
who was super strict about this. He said, it's always wrong
Oh, wow.
to believe anything
Always.
without sufficient evidence.
Wow. Talk about
High standards.
high standards, right?
Yeah.
No pressure.
Right.
But yeah, so I can see how that could be
Yeah.
a real problem for religious belief.
For real challenge, for sure.
I mean, does that mean anyone who's religious is just ignoring reason?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
And this is where things
Yeah.
get interesting. A lot of contemporary thinkers
Yeah.
push back against this
Okay.
strict evidentialism,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to religion.
Right.
They say it's too rigid
Okay.
framework
Yeah.
for something like this.
Like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole?
Exactly. Yeah, it just doesn't quite work.
So what are the alternatives then?
Right.
If we can't rely on evidence alone,
Yeah,
what can we base
right.
religious belief on?
So one alternative
Okay.
that we see is called fideism.
Buddhism.
Fideism.
Yep.
And fideism is basically saying, hey,
Yeah.
evidence isn't everything.
Okay.
Right? It's the idea that religious belief
Right.
doesn't have to be propped up by, scientific
Scientific.
proof or logical arguments.
Yeah.
It's about faith.
Okay.
It's a leap of faith even if it can't be
Yeah.
fully explained or articulated.
Yeah, I can see that. I think we've all had those moments
Sure.
where we've believed something really strongly,
Right.
even if we couldn't necessarily
Explain why.
explain why.
Yeah.
Yeah, and fideism is kind of tapping into that, I guess.
Yeah, it's recognizing that there are other ways of knowing.
Right.
And that not all beliefs, especially ones that are tied to emotions,
Yeah.
need this perfectly rational explanation.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's not just blind faith. It's just a different
It's a different kind of foundation for beliefs.
foundation for belief. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of different foundations,
Yeah.
we have John Henry Newman,
Okay.
who had some really interesting ideas about
Yeah.
how we form beliefs in everyday life.
Okay. Yeah. What did he say?
So Newman argued that, if we're honest, a lot of our beliefs aren't based on,
Yeah.
this airtight logical proof. It's
Right.
more like a bunch of
Mm.
smaller interconnected reasons
Okay.
that build up over time. He called these implicit and cumulative
Okay.
arguments.
So it's like you're not just relying on one big piece of evidence.
Right.
It's like you're building a case.
It's a cumulative case, yeah,
Yeah.
with all these little pieces
Yeah, exactly.
that sort of point in the same direction.
Okay.
And he thought religious belief could work the same way.
Right.
It's not always about this
Yeah.
one big aha
Right.
moment. It's about these smaller experiences, insights, reflections that sort
Right.
of add up over time.
Yeah. That's really relatable.
Yeah.
I don't think many of us have that
Right.
huge epiphany.
One big moment
Yeah.
that suddenly defines all our beliefs.
Exactly. It's a much more
Yes.
gradual process.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where another philosopher,
Okay.
Ludwig Wittgenstein, comes in.
Okay, so Wittgenstein.
Yeah.
Here's where things get interesting.
Yeah.
This is the language games.
Language games.
Tell me about that.
So Wittgenstein argued that language is like a toolbox.
Okay.
You use different tools for different jobs.
Yeah.
You wouldn't use a hammer to fix a leaky faucet.
No, you wouldn't.
So trying to prove
Right.
religious beliefs
Okay.
using the language of science or logic
Yeah.
might be using the wrong tool for the job.
Okay, so you're saying religious language is
Yeah.
like its own tool.
Yeah, it's got its own rules, its own purposes.
Okay.
And so this idea gets even more specific with two key concepts.
Okay.
The autonomy thesis and the incommensurability thesis.
Okay, break those down for me.
So the autonomy thesis
Okay.
basically says, hey, religious claims
Yeah.
should be judged
Okay.
by their own internal standards,
Okay.
not by some outside yardstick.
Okay.
And the incommensurability thesis says
Yeah.
you can't directly compare religious statements
Okay.
to scientific ones.
Right.
They're playing different games altogether.
Oh, that's such a good way to put it.
Yeah, it really highlights how
Yeah.
Wittgensteinian fideism
You,
sees different areas of life as
yeah.
operating with their own unique
Yeah.
logic and ways of making sense of things.
Okay, so we've got evidentialism.
Yep.
We've got fideism.
We do.
We've got Wittgenstein's language games.
Right.
Is there anything else?
There's one more big one.
Okay.
Reformed epistemology.
Okay.
And it's a real game changer.
All right, well, we're going to have to hear all about that
We will.
after the break.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're back and ready to keep unpacking
Yeah,
this whole philosophy of religion thing.
absolutely.
So before we went off on that tangent about language games,
Right.
you mentioned Reformed epistemology.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty intense.
It is. It's a big one.
What's the deal with that?
So Reformed epistemology is kind of like saying, hey,
Okay.
even without a lab report,
Okay.
you know, some beliefs can be totally rock solid
Right.
because of how they're connected to your core experience.
Okay.
So it argues that beliefs can be justified even if they don't have that traditional scientific evidence.
Okay.
As long as they're grounded
Trying to go
and
back.
defensible, you know, they can stand up to scrutiny.
So it's less about like the external proof and more about like the internal.
It's about how the belief is situated
Yeah.
within the person's web of beliefs.
What does it mean for a belief to be grounded, though?
Right.
Is it just like, oh, I feel it in my heart, so it must be true?
Well, it's deeper than that.
Okay.
Think of it like building a house.
Okay.
Okay, so your personal experience,
Okay.
that's the foundation.
Okay.
Right. And sure, other people can't see it.
Right.
But it's what the belief is built on.
Okay.
So let's say someone has had a profound religious experience,
Okay.
some feeling of overwhelming love or a vision
Yeah.
that felt undeniably real.
Yeah.
Reformed epistemologists would say
Okay.
that this experience itself can be the grounding
Oh, fair.
of their belief.
So even if you can't like
Right.
pull out a measuring tape
Yeah.
and prove it happened,
You can't measure it.
it's still like a valid starting point.
It can still be the foundation for the belief. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
But hold on. Just having a foundation isn't enough.
Right.
You still got to make sure the house can withstand a storm.
Yeah.
Right. So grounded beliefs
Okay.
also need to be defensible.
Okay.
So if someone raises a strong objection,
Yeah.
you need to be able to address it thoughtfully.
It's like saying, okay, you had this experience.
Right.
It led you to this belief.
Yeah.
But can your belief stand up to scrutiny?
Can it hold its own in a debate?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's where all sorts of arguments come into play.
Okay.
You know, the problem of evil sociological explanation.
Right.
Even cognitive science gets involved.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Cognitive science. What does brain stuff
I know, right?
have to do with the philosophy of religion?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
So some cognitive scientists, they
Yeah.
look at how our brains are wired and they say, hey, maybe religious belief
Okay.
is just a byproduct of evolution.
Okay.
So like you have Justin Barrick's theory
Yeah.
of a hyperactive agency detection device.
Okay.
Basically, our brains are so good at spotting patterns
Yeah.
that we sometimes see intention
Yeah.
where there is none,
Right.
which might lead us to believe in supernatural beings.
So our brains are like playing tricks on us.
Well, that's one interpretation, yeah.
Making us see goats in the machine.
Yeah,
Does that mean that religious belief is just like
right.
a big evolutionary misunderstanding?
That's one way to look at it,
Okay.
but Reformed epistemologists would say
Okay.
that even if there are natural explanations
Right.
for why we believe something,
Yeah.
it doesn't automatically mean
Okay.
that the belief itself is wrong.
Okay.
It's still possible
Yeah.
for a belief to be both grounded
Yeah.
and rational,
Okay.
even if our biology plays apart.
So it's like saying, okay, maybe there's an evolutionary reason why I see faces in the clouds,
Right.
but that doesn't mean there aren't actually faces in the clouds.
Exactly.
It's kind of a mind bend.
Like it is, right. And that actually leads to
Okay.
a really fascinating sort of variation of reformed epistemology.
Okay.
What we might call counter-reformed epistemology.
Counter-reform.
Counter-reform.
Okay, I'm really curious now.
Yeah.
What's that all about?
So this view says that a belief can also be warranted
Okay.
if it's rooted in a strong religious tradition.
Okay.
So it's not just about your individual experience,
Right.
but the shared history, the practices,
Yeah.
the wisdom of a whole community.
Okay.
If a belief has stood the test of time
Right.
and is deeply embedded in a tradition
Yeah.
that gives it a certain weight.
It's like this belief has been around for centuries.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been passed down through generations.
Mm,
It's survived wars and plagues,
right.
scientific revolutions.
It must be onto something.
Maybe it's onto something, right?
And it acknowledges the social dimension of belief,
Okay.
the power of communal experience
Right.
and wisdom.
But counter-reformed epistemology still emphasizes critical thinking.
Absolutely.
It's not about blindly accepting everything your tradition teaches.
No, it's about recognizing
Yeah.
the valuable role that tradition plays
Right.
in shaping our understanding of the world.
This all makes me think about divine revelation.
Okay,
Where does that fit in?
right.
Is that just another kind of grounded experience?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Evidentialists might approach divine revelation skeptically,
Right.
like show me the receipts.
Yeah.
Prove that this message came from on high.
Right.
But reformed epistemologists might say
Okay.
that if someone genuinely experiences divine revelation,
Okay.
that experience itself
Yeah.
could be a solid foundation for belief.
So it's about the direct experience, not just
Right.
analyzing ancient texts.
It's about the encounter.
Okay.
Yeah, and philosopher George Mavrides
Okay.
has argued that any belief coming from
Yeah.
genuine divine revelation
Right.
is justified.
Okay.
He's explored all sorts of ways
Yeah.
that revelation might happen
Right.
and how it could justify
Yeah.
religious belief.
But how do you determine
Right.
if a revelation is genuine?
That's the question.
Like, couldn't anyone just say,
Right.
God told me to do X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, God told me to rob a bank.
Right. And justify anything?
Right. How do we know?
Yeah. It seems like that could get
It does get tricky.
pretty subjective.
For sure.
And maybe even dangerous.
Yeah. And philosopher Linda Zagzebski
Okay.
has pointed this out.
Okay.
She argues that if we only rely on personal revelation
Okay.
with no external checks and balances,
Right.
it becomes impossible
Yeah.
to know if a belief is actually warranted or not.
So we need some way
You need some
to
criteria.
evaluate,
Yeah,
some way to
that's-
assess.
Yeah. The quality of these revelations. Yeah.
Like some quality control to
Yeah.
separate the wheat from the chaff.
Exactly. And that's where
Okay.
this concept of tests for revelation comes in.
Okay.
So a lot of religious traditions
Yeah.
have criteria for assessing
Okay.
the authenticity of revelations.
Okay.
So they look at things like,
Okay.
does this align with our core teachings?
Right.
Does it have good ethical implications? Does it lead to positive changes in people's lives?
So it's about having those checks and balances,
Right.
making sure it kind of fits
Yeah.
with the overall values of the
It's a
faith.
delicate balance
Okay.
between personal experience
Right.
and communal discernment.
This whole discussion makes me wonder,
Yeah.
with all these different perspectives,
Right.
how do we even begin to make sense of the fact
Right.
that intelligent, sincere people
Yeah.
can hold such
Wildly.
wildly
Different
religious beliefs?
Yeah, it's the age-old puzzle
Yeah.
of religious disagreement.
Right. And it's a thorny one.
It is a tough one.
It is. It's like you look at a
Yeah.
map of the world's religions.
Right.
And it's just this crazy quilt of different
It's a patchwork
Yeah.
of different beliefs.
and practices.
And practices, yeah.
It can be overwhelming.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah. It can even lead to skepticism.
Sure.
If there's no clear winner,
Right.
shouldn't we just kind of throw up our hands and say,
Yes.
I don't know what to believe?
So some philosophers like Richard Feldman
Okay.
would say yes.
Right?
He argues that when we're in a situation
Okay.
of what he calls public epistemic parity,
Public epistemic parity. Okay.
which means there's no obvious reason
Okay.
to favor one view over another,
Okay.
the most rational thing to do
Yeah.
is to suspend judgment.
So if you can't figure out
Right.
who's right or wrong,
Yeah.
you just don't choose a side.
You stay neutral.
Okay.
That's Feldman's take.
Interesting.
But other philosophers, like
Yeah.
Peter Van Inwagen,
Okay.
they say, hold on,
Okay.
there might be private justifications.
Private justifications. Okay.
So it's like saying, I understand why you hold your view
Okay.
based on what you know,
Yeah.
but I have additional insights that lead me to a different conclusion.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it also seems like it could lead to
Right.
people talking past each other.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, because of something
Because it's something you don't even know.
that you don't even have access to.
Yeah. It's a tricky situation.
It is.
No doubt.
Yeah, and it gets to the heart of this
It does.
challenge of religious disagreement.
Absolutely.
How do we
deal with these?
Yeah, how do we approach these differences
Yeah.
with humility, with intellectual honesty,
Right.
while still
Holding on to our own convictions.
holding on to our own conviction?
It's a balancing act.
It is.
For sure.
Yeah, we don't want to just dismiss other people's beliefs.
No, but we also want...
But we want to be true to ourselves.
Be true to our own understanding.
Yeah,
And it seems like this is where faith comes in.
maybe so.
That willingness to believe,
Right.
even when things are uncertain.
Yeah, when things are messy.
Yeah, or messy. And philosopher Peter Forrest
Okay.
offers a really interesting perspective here.
Okay.
He argues that when we're dealing with beliefs that are fundamentally different in nature,
Okay.
we can't always compare them directly
Okay.
or expect them to be resolved by pure logic.
Right.
Sometimes a certain level of commitment
Okay.
is required.
Yeah.
Even if we can't definitively prove our position.
So it's about acknowledging that reason
Yeah.
has its limits.
Reason has its limits.
Sometimes you just have to take that leap of faith,
Maybe so.
but not a blind leap.
Right. It's still informed
Yeah.
by our experience, by our values,
Yeah.
by our commitments.
And that leads us to a fascinating question
It does.
that we're going to
Our
explore
final
by
part.
the final part.
Yeah. How do we navigate this complex landscape of belief,
Right?
both individually and as a society?
All right. Well, I am definitely ready for part 3.
Let's do it.
Okay. So we are back for the final part
Part 3.
of our deep dive
Deep dive
into the epistemology
of religion.
of religion. And I got to say, my brain is
Yeah.
definitely doing some heavy lifting.
It's a lot to process, for sure.
Yeah, we've been through the ringer here.
We have.
We went from hardcore evidentialism
We did.
to leaps of faith,
That's right.
tradition, even cognitive science.
All of it.
So like,
But that's what makes philosophy so engaging, right?
it is.
It forces us to grapple with the big questions.
Yeah, the stuff that really matters.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So now that we've explored all these
Yeah,
different ways philosophers look at religious belief,
right.
I'm curious, what does all this mean
Yeah.
for someone just like trying to make sense of their own
Their own beliefs?
beliefs, right?
Yeah. How do we live with these questions?
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about it in the abstract,
Right.
but how do we actually live with this stuff?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And honestly, there's no easy answer. There's no magic formula.
Right.
Philosophy can give us
Yeah.
tools and frameworks for thinking,
Right.
but ultimately,
Yeah.
each person has to walk their own path.
So there's no right answer. There's no like checklist
No.
to follow. Does that mean it's all just up in the air?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think what matters is that we
I did.
engage with these questions authentically
Yeah.
and thoughtfully. You know, we need to be willing to examine our beliefs,
Right.
consider different perspectives,
Yeah.
wrestle with those tough doubts.
That's like that old saying.
Yeah.
The unexamined life
Is not worth living.
is not worth living.
Right. And I think that applies to our beliefs too.
Totally.
We shouldn't just accept things blindly,
Right.
whether it's what we were raised with or
Yeah.
what's easiest to believe, you know?
Yeah, we owe it to ourselves.
We owe it to ourselves to dig deeper.
to dig deeper. Yeah, to ask those tough questions.
Absolutely.
This makes me think about the role of doubt.
Okay.
Is it okay to have doubt?
Yeah.
Even if you're a religious person?
Yeah.
I feel like some people think doubt is like
Right.
the enemy of faith.
Yeah, doubt is often seen as a bad thing.
Right.
But actually, I think doubt can be incredibly valuable,
Okay.
even essential for spiritual growth.
Okay.
When we face our doubts head on,
Yeah.
it forces us to search for deeper understanding, more solid foundations.
So doubt's not the villain. It's more like
I like
a
that.
personal trainer
Yeah.
pushing you to become stronger.
It like a tree. If it
Right.
never faces strong winds,
Right.
its roots stay shallow.
Yeah.
And it can be easily toppled.
Okay.
But a tree that's weathered storms
Right.
grows deep roots,
Okay.
anchoring it firmly to the ground.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So instead of running from doubt,
Right.
we should embrace it
Embrace the doubt.
as a chance to build
Yeah.
a more resilient
A more resilient.
faith, or even if you're not religious,
Right.
just to kind of refine your understanding of the world
Yeah, it's
and your place in it.
it's all part of the process.
It is. And this all tied into, I think, the importance of humility.
Humility is huge.
Like, we need to acknowledge that we don't
we don't have all the answers.
have all the answers. Yeah.
And that other people might have insights that we haven't even considered.
Which brings us back to that
Right back to
challenge of religious disagreement.
That's right.
How do we navigate those differences
Yeah.
when they feel so personal
When they feel so important.
and so important? Yeah,
It's tough.
it is tough.
But I think the key is to approach those conversations
Okay.
with respect
Yeah.
and a genuine desire to understand.
Okay.
Listen carefully to what others have to say.
Yeah.
Even if you disagree.
So it's not about trying to win the argument.
No, it's not about winning. It's about understanding.
Really engaging
Yeah,
with the other person's perspective.
Absolutely. And even if you don't end up changing your mind,
Yeah.
you might learn something new.
Right.
Or at least gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity of the issue.
This whole conversation has been so enriching.
It has.
I feel like I have a much better grasp of how
Yeah.
philosophers tackle these questions
Right.
of belief and justification.
It's a fascinating area.
It is.
And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's
Yes.
a whole world of philosophy out there.
And I'll be diving in deeper.
Me too.
I hope our listeners will too.
Absolutely.
So as we ramp up this deep dive,
Okay.
I want to leave you with one final question to ponder.
All right, shoot.
When it comes to your own deeply held beliefs,
Yeah.
religious or not,
Right.
how do you balance
Yeah.
the need for justification
Okay.
with the role of personal conviction?
Right.
How do you reconcile the head and the heart
That's a great question.
in your search for truth?
That's a wonderful question to reflect on.
It is, and I think wrestling with questions like that
I agree.
is what makes this journey
Absolutely.
of understanding so rewarding.
Couldn't have said it to myself.
So thanks for joining us
Thanks for having me.
on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll catch you on the next episode
See you next time.
of The Deep Dive.